Atako's funeral was a grand affair. The whole town of Ojiji gathered, whispering about his wealth, his mysterious death, and the rumors of dark rituals. His body was lowered into the ground as wails filled the air, but while his family grieved, something unnatural was happening elsewhere. Atako's ghost was not at rest. As he stood among the shadows, watching his own burial, an unfamiliar voice called his name. He turned and found himself face to face with an old man, his grandfather, long deceased. "You have been foolish, my son," the old man sighed, shaking his head. "Had you waited just one more week, riches beyond your imagination would have come to you naturally. But your impatience led you to a path of suffering." Atako's spirit trembled. "1 week?" he repeated in disbelief. "You mean I would have been wealthy without the ritual?" His grandfather nodded solemnly. "Not only that," he continued, "your sins were forgiven. If only you had endured until the 7 years expired, your life would have continued, and your wealth would have remained." Atako fell to his knees, tormented by regret. The cult had tricked him. He had sold his soul for nothing, yet his grandfather wasn't done. "There is a fight for your soul, Atako. You died before your time. I have pleaded for a second chance for you, but you cannot return to your old life. You must be reborn elsewhere." Atako felt a sudden pull, as if the world around him was splitting. The darkness swallowed him whole. When he awoke, he was alive, but in a different place, with the same body. He looked like Atako, but he no longer lived in Ojiji. He went to another country where no one recognized him as Atako, and he changed his name to Atewe. Now reborn, Atewe found himself in a distant town where no one knew him. With a new identity and an inexplicable gift of knowledge, he became an architect. Strangely, everything he touched seemed to flourish effortlessly. He built a grand house, acquired luxurious cars, and soon became a man of influence in his new home. But deep inside, something felt wrong. No one truly knew him. His wealth felt hollow, and at night, strange whispers echoed in his home, voices from his past life. His success was real, but his existence was an illusion. One day, as he arrived to shop for some foodstuffs, he met Hada. Hada was a young lady who caught Atewe's attention. She was beautiful, kind, and full of life, the light in his otherwise shadowy existence. Atewe walked up to her and asked her to be the woman of his dreams. Hada agreed after some days, and they began dating. Atewe loved her deeply, and when she became pregnant, he decided to make her his wife. However, Hada was troubled. Atewe was everything she ever wanted in a man, but for the 2 years they have dated, Atewe has never spoke of his family nor talk about introducing Hada to them. She stylishly raised the issue severally to Atewe, but instead, Atewe would either change the topic or become so quiet. One evening she started thinking deeply, and she voiced out, "You have no family. I know nothing about where you come from. Who are you, really?" Atako, who has now changed his name to Atewe, avoided the question. He gave vague stories, but Hada was not convinced. She insisted on meeting at least one member of his family before their marriage. Hada already sensed that something was wrong, but she could not understand. Everything seemed perfect in the relationship. Atewe has been so caring and protective around her. He told Hada that he owned a company in one of the African countries. This was what Atako told Hada, and she believed. He also told Hada that he lost his parents in a car crash and his siblings were out of town for their studies. Throughout their relationship, strange occurrences had happened. She remembered how a stranger saw them together and froze in shock. He stared at Atewe for a long time before shaking his head, muttering, "You remind me of someone. But that's impossible. The encounter left Hada puzzled, but before she could question it further, Atako insisted they moved out of their house. "This place is no longer safe," he said hastily, offering a flimsy excuse about privacy concerns. This happened not once, but 3 times. Each time someone vaguely recognized Atako, he uprooted their lives, shifting to another location overnight. Hade found it suspicious, but Atewi always had a convincing excuse. Secondly, Atewi's sense of style really baffled Hada. All his clothes were in white. She had asked him about it and he told her he preferred wearing white because he simply loves it. It wasn't until she insisted on meeting his family that she truly understood the depth of the mystery. Reluctantly, Atako agreed. The journey back to Ojiji was long and silent. As they approached the town, an eerie sense of dread settled in his chest. He hadn't set foot in his birthplace since his rebirth. And he feared what would happen if he did now. He knew his time with Hada was almost up. He really wanted to see his child before all this. Just as they neared the entrance of Ojiji, Atako suddenly clutched his phone. "I just got a distress call," he lied. "One of my workers has an emergency at the construction site. Go ahead and meet my family. I'll join you soon." He gave Hade clear directions to his family home and watched as she entered the town alone. The moment she arrived, she was greeted warmly by Atako's family. But when she introduced herself and explained that she was engaged to Atewi, silence filled the room. The expressions of his family turned from warmth to horror. "Atewi?" His mother gasped. "That cannot be. His real name is Atako and he died 5 years ago. I am his mother and I cannot lie to you." "This can't be," Hada said. "Atewi told me he lost his parents to an accident." Hada's face drained of color. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible. I've been living with him. I'm carrying his child." The family members exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring amongst themselves. Some crossed themselves in fear, others whispered prayers. Finally, Atako's uncle spoke. "You need to take us to this man you call Atewi." Meanwhile, Atako, who is now Atewi, sat in his car outside the town, his hands gripping the steering wheel. His heart pounded as the inevitable truth loomed over him. He had tried to outrun fate, but now, his 2 worlds were about to collide. A cold breeze swept through the trees, and a familiar voice echoed in his ears. It was his grandfather's voice once more. "You cannot escape destiny, Atako," the old man whispered. "What is done cannot be undone. But what will you choose now? Since your time is not up yet, you will have to disappear immediately from here and start all over again to where no one knows you." As he sat frozen, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Hada was coming back with his family. The time of reckoning had arrived. Hada journeyed back to their home. She tried to call Atako severally, but his phones were switched off. She had described their home to his family and they were coming behind her. Hada's face was pale when she confronted him. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. She held up her phone, showing pictures of them together, pictures that, by all logic, should not exist if Atako had truly died 5 years ago. Atako looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a sad smile formed on his lips. "I'm sorry, Hada," he whispered. Before her eyes, his form flickered. His features blurred, his presence thinning like mist. She reached out, but her hands grasped only empty air. In a final whisper carried by the wind, his voice lingered, "Forgive me." By the time Hada and Atako's family reached his supposed home, everything was gone. The grand house, the cars, the wealth, it had all vanished as if it had never been there. Hada collapsed to her knees, staring at the empty land where Atako's mansion once stood. The reality of it all hit her at once. She had loved a man who no longer existed.